I was very inspired to see a video that you did on the internet, and you used a wonderful phrase in that video, which was you called for architects to re-engineer their dreams in order to build for a sustainable future. And if you think about it, this means nothing less than actually restructuring the architectural imagination. And I want to talk about this imagination. The imagination needed for our climate crisis is very simple. It's a caring imagination. What you're addressing is a massive lack of care. It's actually something that Pope Francis has underlined in his latest encyclical, for those of you who've followed it. And my argument is that a culture of uncare in the global north is actively working to break our felt links with the part of us that cares. And it does this to block change and to promote intensive carbon business as usual. And I suggest that we're all more or less under the influence of this culture. Now, your phrase, Sue, re-engineering a dream, resonates with a psychoanalytic way of seeing, because in this way of seeing, thinking is an inner, psychic, dynamic building project in which we maintain links with care by keeping those we care for near us in the internal world of our imagination. We keep them close enough to feel touched by them. A main way that we break links to care is by spatially rearranging our relationships in the inner world of the mind, and to do this in order to keep people at a distance. And as distanced others, which is an active mental process when we distance others, the other, we do not care for them. An internal world with uncare in charge is an internal world in which our relationships have been re-engineered spatially in this kind of way. And my argument is that in a culture of a culture of uncare works to promote this kind of rearranging, and it can lead to a distorted inner representation of the external world. I will look at what sort of caring imagination we need to dream of and to build a sustainable world, and I call it the new imagination. Embracing the new imagination involves repairing broken links with care and forging new links with care. This can be difficult and painful, but it also expands the experience of self and of feeling alive. It's what you were referring to as, in your model, as I think it was the one of well-being. Yeah. So now turning to the culture of uncare. A culture of uncare has gained ascendancy in the period of globalization since the late 1970s. It has by now been extensively studied by social and psychosocial scientists, with each scholar naming it in turn as narcissistic, perverse, consumerist, extractive, entitled, arrogant, even psychopathic, instrumental, and manically triumphant. All these have been, all these models have had these different names, and all these are aspects of uncare, and together they cohere to form a mindset. They're all aspects of a particular mindset which I've called the uncaring mindset. It is organized, it is narrow-minded, it is short-term minded, avaricious, and it tends to be set and tenacious. The uncaring mindset is at the heart of the culture of uncare. It is driven by a powerful undermining fantasy. This is that the earth is an idealized and indestructible breast toilet mother, i.e. it's there solely to provide endlessly for us and to absorb all our waste. The project to globalise the economy was driven by this fantasy. Grab, 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 now, 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 undermine as many restraining trade barriers as possible, hide the true costs, and let tomorrow go hang was the order of the day. Laws were framed and trade agreements put in place to facilitate deregulation. Naomi Klein has described this process in her new book on climate change. Deregulation means people working to undermine the frameworks of care that hold excessive greed and entitlement in check. The only possible outcome of globalization, of a form driven by this mindset, one that sees the earth as a breast toilet mother, the only possible outcome was a pile-up of social and environmental damage. The biggest problem for the drivers of the global economy was how to get people to cooperate with an immoral and inherently unsustainable project. Happy, carefree consumers were needed to boost profits. The problem was people care. The need was to reverse the human climate so that people would care too little, not too much. And to date, trillions of dollars have been spent on undermining care through working to shift people's bedrock ego ideals of caring behaviour. Undermining care has been brought about through political framing, mass media, the academe, general culture, and advertising. It has led to a change in the culture of our social groups towards great disregard for science, more materialistic values, and the idea that to feel as free of care as possible is most desirable, rather than being a warning sign that one is living in a gated retreat in the mind. All this money would not need to have been spent, and it would not have been spent if people were basically uncaring by nature. Instead, people are caring and uncaring by nature. The global economy's business plan was to drive uncare and to disable care, specifically in relation to our behaviour as consumers. The need was for people happily to consume ever more products produced in the cheapest possible way to maximise profits. The true cost was climate change and rising social inequality. People's moral qualms, their feelings of responsibility, their anxiety that it would all end very badly, their sense of guilt, and their impulse to resist taking part stood in the way of the willing cooperation that was needed. The new culture that came in had and has an ideological function. This was and is to help people find ways not to care too much about living in a way that they know deep down is morally wrong and unsustainable. The culture's aim was promoting an uncaring mindset. This mindset has trickled down from corporate power to governments, to social groups, to the individual psyche. Here's an example of the mindset at a corporate level. In 1991, Lawrence Summers, then president of the World Bank, confided in a leaked confidential memo, quote, "Just between you and me, shouldn't the World Bank be encouraging more migration of the dirty industries to the least developed countries?" Here is the uncaring mindset writ large. Outsource environmental damage to those who are far away and without power. Let them bear the suffering. When this email was exposed, Summers said he was only joking. Presumably, this was because he did not want either the bank or himself as the bank's leader to be judged as immoral. The problem is people care. They feel guilty and ashamed at having their care exposed, and even if they don't, they know others will judge them. This is the main reason why damaging and inequitable trade treaties are negotiated in secret, away from public scrutiny. Like others, I was shocked to read of Summers' memo, but I too outsource environmental damage I cause, albeit obviously on a far smaller scale. And here's an example of where I saw this clearly. I was waiting for the bus, having decided to travel more by public transport to reduce my carbon emissions. It was spitting rain, blowy and cold, and I thought, I hate waiting for the bus, I just wish I'd taken the car. Suddenly, spontaneously, I imagined my grandchildren overhearing my thought. They were now young adults, not children. In my imagination, their world, a future world, was right up close to my world. In my imagination, we were all close enough to hear, see, and touch each other. Close enough for me to see the extreme weather they were in, and close enough to feel their suffering. I didn't plan this, it just happened to me, it came to me like this. I felt ashamed. Part of my shame was feeling I was so much less of a person than I wished I could be, and feel I can be. I felt trivial, fatuous and grumpy, like a spoilt, entitled brat. I had heard myself in a different way and with a different perspective. And I think it was because I felt a direct, loving, empathic link with my grown-up children. And because I felt this link so keenly, I managed to stay in touch with what I'd understood, despite it being painful. This was that I had, without being consciously aware of it, relocated my own grandchildren to a faraway place in my imagination, a place that I'd labelled the future. And I'd done this in order to sever a caring, loving link with them. I'd moved them from being close to distant, so I would not have to feel guilty, ashamed, and anguished about my carbon behaviour. Here I was, in an uncaring mindset, outsourcing suffering. In my imagination, my grandchildren were now distanced others, far enough away to be outside the area of my love and concern. I had broken my caring link with their actual future experience to assuage my guilt. Now, I often thought about how climate change will affect the lives of my grandchildren, and now realize that this was with real empathy cut off. I'd never felt affected like this. Here I believe I had repaired the loving, caring link between us. I'd reversed the mental distancing and brought them back close to me where they properly belong. This is the sort of mental re-engineering I think is required. The mechanism I've described, that of actively breaking loving links to avoid mental pain, is an ordinary human defense mechanism that can usefully and does usefully protect us from being too emotionally overwhelmed. My point is that the culture of Uncare boosts the breaking of caring links, and it boosts mental distancing on a daily basis. It does this in many ways and through different branches of the culture. For instance, take our social groups. Mine would be more likely to say, "Don't be so hard on yourself, Sally. Give yourself a break. Don't be omnipotent. Do you really think that your one tiny action of taking the bus is going to save the world?" They would be less likely to say, "Yes, it's unpleasant waiting for the bus, but stick at it. Perhaps give yourself a break if you're tired or not feeling well. Face how helpless and enraged you feel that government is not stepping up and tackling climate change. Use these feelings constructively to help you do what you can to combat climate change." That's our social groups. Take our newspapers. They mostly airbrush out any references to climate change. They're still doing it. For example, at his last inauguration as president, Obama spoke about climate change. The main headline across the mass media that day was, "Did Beyoncé lip sync the national anthem?" Take advertising and general culture. These relentlessly exhort and seduce us to feel entitled to idealized conditions. They encourage the uncaring part of us that I heard in my voice at the bus stop. The aim of this culture is to break links with care and encourage spatial distancing of the victims of our uncare in the internal world of the psyche. The aim is to keep us defended against feeling conflicted and anguished at our collectively damaging way of life. I'm going to talk about disavowal. These distancing strategies are part of what is called disavowal, which is seeing reality with one eye but finding ways to remain blind to reality at a feeling level. Disavow can leave us with highly distorted inner pictures of reality, with people we love kept far away or in the shadows, with important issues tiny and trivial, big issues, with important issues tiny and trivial issues big, with times march arrested to the present tense only, and with the environmental and social violence that we do carefully airbrushed out of the picture. We sanitize our inner landscapes through psychic re-engineering, and we do this to protect ourselves from emotional discomfort and pain. The culture, rather than help us face reality, which is what a decent culture does, invites us repeatedly to engage in disavowal. In this culture, it is very difficult to resist being drawn in. One particularly destructive aspect of disavowal is that it attempts to solve problems omnipotently, i.e., through an act of thought rather than in the real world. This is magical as-if thinking, not rational thinking. My mental distancing is an example of as-if thinking. It was as if I could rid myself of guilt and anxiety through an act of thought. I cut my links to care by locating my grandchildren far away, in the future, as if this would solve the problem. At one level, it does solve the problem, in that it gets rid of consciously experienced guilt for the time being. The cost is a mind but the price you pay is a mind that no longer functions rationally. And as if thinking leads to problems getting worse, because the damaging behavior is not addressed in reality. Genuine care involves mourning the fantasy that the earth is an idealized breast toilet mother, and attempting to address the damage this fantasy has caused. As if care is setting ambitious climate targets one knows will not be kept, or minimizing the danger, or believing in miracle techno quick fixes, or avoiding hearing any news about the damage, or rubbishing the climate science community, or locating the damage in some future far-off place, or preferably doing all these at the same time. All these are magical repairs. They all work by cutting felt links with care. As if omnipotent solutions can be rustled up in an instant. They are fake solutions. They require no inner psychic work to reconnect with care. Connecting and reconnecting with care is the only kind of work that will lead to real repairs being undertaken in the external world. The true aim of omnipotent solutions is to enable business as usual to proceed, carbon-intensive business as usual. Omnipotent thinking is now so widespread in relation to climate change that any troublesome aspect of the problem can apparently be instantly dismissed through an act of thought. At the bus stop, I was in disavowal, operating in an as-if thinking mode. Its purpose was to avoid guilt while still feeling apparently good and virtuous. In a state of disavowal, I could write about the effects of climate change on my grandchildren without taking greater care to reduce my own emissions, and I could push my guilt about this and my grandchildren to the edges of my mind. I want to talk about the new imagination. The new imagination is made up of elements that are very old and also very new. It is the caring imagination that we need for now. It's very old because the ongoing struggle between uncare and care is as old as humankind. Homer described this struggle in the Iliad. Destructiveness, sure-footed and strong, races round the world doing harm, followed haltingly by care, which is lame, wrinkled, has difficulty seeing, and goes to great lengths trying to put things right. In the new imagination, care no longer appeases uncare. It is no longer led by the nose by uncare, like an ineffectual parent cleaning up after a self-centered, triumphant toddler running amok. Care in the new imagination has come of age. It stands up to uncare. It represents the moment when the human race matures, starts to grow up, and faces reality. The new imagination recognizes that because of our environmental and carbon crisis, we are a unique generation, tasked with a particularly heavy burden of care about climate change. The last generation did not have the full picture, and if we leave taking care to the next generation, or even to ourselves tomorrow, it will be too late. The new imagination recognizes that we face a full-blown emergency, but also knows that we can address it. One strand of the new imagination is very new historically, because only now, with scientific and technological advances and satellite pictures, can we more fully appreciate Earth in her otherness, her majesty, and also as fragile and with limits. We now can see that she comprises complex, interconnecting dynamic systems that support life. All this enables us to love her more fully and in a more mature way, and to be very concerned to see her damaged. The new imagination helps us face our true dependence on and indebtedness to the Earth. It helps us give up and mourn the narrow-minded fantasy of her as an idealized breast toilet mother to exploit and think we can control. The other strand we need for the new imagination to fully flourish is a deeper understanding of psychology and culture. This enables us to take a more sympathetic and a more critical look at ourselves. It helps us to recognize that care is not best understood just at an individual level. Care flourishes when frameworks of care are in place, and it withers without these frameworks. And now finally, and briefly, I will look at frameworks of care. So a framework of care is a structure designed by people who do care. It's a sign of background mindfulness. It does two things. It keeps destructive, uncaring social behaviors in check, and it actively supports caring social behaviors. Frameworks of care exist at all levels, from laws that prohibit violence and theft, to social groups that appropriately name and shame while also helping people face life's difficulties, to parents who understand how their child feels and also provide discipline where necessary, to the inner moral code we have internalized that regulates our behavior. Frameworks of care help us maintain our living, direct links with felt care. They also help us mend caring links when these have become severed, and they do this in many different ways. We vitally depend on our frameworks of care and are often not even aware that they are in place, only noticing their effects when they start to break down. A civil society depends on them. When architects build sustainable buildings, they build physical structures to keep people safe. With these structures, they are also building frameworks of care. This is a profoundly important aspect of their function. The frameworks of care they build are vitally necessary for mental health. These frameworks of care keep Uncare in check in psychological as well as practical ways. If we live in a passive or active house and travel on carbon ultralight transport, our carbon emissions drop right down. If our buildings are designed to better withstand ravaged elements, we are safer. This enables us to feel that our survival is cared about. And one point that psychoanalysis has discovered is that in order to care, you need to feel cared about. It starts when you're a baby. But architectural frameworks of care do much more than this, provide us with physical safety. They provide us with direct, tangible experience in our daily life with people, nature, and beauty to keep our links with care alive. They help us reconnect with being citizens, not just consumers, in the way that they arrange social space. All this expands our sense of self, boosts our creativity, and connects us to others in a more caring way. All this disrupts the self-idealizing idea that we are somehow superior to and more entitled than other people and other species.
Thank you very much. Sorry. So, Sue, I wondered if you wanted to pick up on Sally's response.
Very much indeed. Taking that on board, I've just read James Fitch on the forces that drove American buildings. Fascinating book, 2 volumes on it. And he points out the early on in the corporate America, the links that they went to sever the links between workers in their organizations and businesses and the places they lived in. So they would move them around every 2 years, because if and they still do this, if they actually kept them in the communities, too much of their effort would go into the community well-being and so on, and they'd have less time and work and attention to give to the business, which was, they wanted the business to be central to the entire life of the people who worked for them. This was the American corporations. This is the late 1800s even. And I was thinking of, for instance, the regulations written by HVAC engineers that push you into not using natural ventilation. I'm thinking of planning laws where the planning departments, say in London or something, are kept with so little money that the only way they can survive is by giving permission to sort of vast buildings that they don't possibly want because they get so much money in gain. And I'm thinking about an entire system that is rigged the power is in the hands of the 1%, and it's rigged to promote the interests of the 1%. And I thought, oh my God, this is so depressing. But then I have the experience of this 1 to 1 million solar roof project, because of course Britain's now got the choices of, do we go into large-scale nuclear or fracking? For instance, you might be affected here with fracking. Mm-hmm. And suddenly, when I just wrote out to all the solar pioneers, I said, hey, we're going to have a party to say how great we are, And the people who came were extraordinary. Local people who've put solar on their roofs, small community groups, councils, businesses who are making money out of it. It's like this whole ecosystem of a solar economy. And that solar economy, there is now 8 megawatts of installed solar energy in Britain. There's only 9.2 megawatts of installed nuclear capacity. So see how fast this has happened. Why are these people doing it? They're not doing it to make money often. I mean, they have done so far. But the primary driver is because they want the world to be a better, safer place, I think, for their children and their grandchildren. They've made that step, that inconvenience, to do that. And so I see, for instance, solar power as citizen power, and each solar roof is a vote for a safer, cleaner future. And so on one hand, you have the carers, and so, I did a letter to The Guardian recently, if every person who puts if you want to fight fracking or in a toxic nuclear future, keep building those solar roofs. And these small things that are coming up, because of course the government doesn't want you to build solar, because their friends in big energy then don't get the profits. Because a lot of it's being driven by the greed of the people who seek the bonuses at the top. It's quite incredible, the more you think about it. But do you think that this, there is a strong counter-movement to this systematic pushing of people into the wrong direction, isn't there? Do you see that?
I think there's a tremendously strong counter movement. And just to go back for a minute, because you said a lot and I was fascinated. I find it absolutely fascinating that you give the example of the systematic severing of links with care. It's actually a very good example of this, and it's done in the service of an entirely instrumental view of people as there to make profits from. And it's such a perverse situation where people are encouraged to feel so special when actually the underlying aim is to exploit them. This is, and that must never be made too visible because otherwise people get too cross, But I was very interested in that link that you made with,
So you
actually making workers move around
yeah.
so that they cannot, which absolutely breaks your links with care. So I was very interested in that. I think one of the things that you raise, which is very hard to live with, which is that is the way that one can just lose heart. Okay, very easily, and one can lose heart in different ways. One, because what we're up against is very organised. We're up against a global system which is organised in terms of Uncare at the moment, and one can, feel very daunted taking that on. I've come to look at losing heart in different sorts of ways. I now also see it more as a cultural expression. I've started to notice that any time you talk to someone about climate change, someone who basically wants to defend their existing position and doesn't really want to take it on board, they will find a reason to shut you down. Very, very often, I agree with you entirely, but it's all too late, and this, and what I've come to realise is that there will always be a reason to shut you down, because that's the aim. And it also attacks the will. So I thought to myself, it's a bit like, it's a bit like at this time when we need to be resilient and we need to look after, do some heart management. Winston Churchill, for instance, going on the airwaves and saying, I've just got to tell the British public, those Germans, they're so strong, and I don't think we're going to do this, It's, I think we have to be very careful, about careless talk. It costs life inside us, So I think we have to be very, very caring and mindful towards our own hearts, because we know we're in a tough situation. But as you say, actually, the thing that buoys me up is that the thing that buoyed me up more than anything was realising they would not have spent trillions of dollars on disabling care if people didn't care. People do care. And I think there's a resurgence of care, so that gives one heart, actually. And the other thing that I would say is that I think we need to be very supportive of each other, because one can't face this kind of thing on one's own. Professionals, groups of architects need to support each other, just like, I have a Psychology Climate Alliance where we support each other, because to really look at reality, given how bad things have got, one needs to have quite a lot of emotional strength, and one needs to be willing to allow oneself to feel sad and depressed and to grieve, and because it's only by, because thinking without those feelings attached is cut off thinking that's not going to help us move and change.